The lawyer's voice droned on like a bad sermon, reading words that made my heart turn to ice. And to Jasmine Nicole Carter, my personal assistant and dear friend, I leave the entirety of my estate, including all properties, bank accounts, investments, and personal effects. I sat there in that cold conference room, feeling like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed. 43 years. 43 years I stood by Walter Hayes. Through his dialysis treatments, through building his construction business from nothing, through raising our 2 children in a 2-bedroom apartment before we could afford better. And now, 3 months after burying my husband, I'm supposed to believe he left everything to a 29-year-old girl who'd worked for him for barely 2 years? Jasmine sat across from me. Her lips curved in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She wore a black dress that probably cost more than my Sunday best, and her freshly done nails tapped against the mahogany table. Tap, tap, tap. Like she was counting down the seconds until she could kick me out of the house Walter and I bought in 1995. My son DeAndre reached for my hand, but I could see the defeat in his eyes. My daughter Tanya had tears running down her face, smudging her mascara. They looked at me like I was already a ghost, like I'd already lost everything. That's when my phone buzzed in my purse. I almost ignored it, almost let that moment pass. But something made me look. Maybe it was the Holy Spirit. Maybe it was Walter himself reaching down from heaven. I don't know. But I pulled out my phone and read the message from a number I recognized immediately. Harold Mitchell, Walter's lawyer for 20 years before he retired last year. The text said, "Corinne, I'm outside. The will is fake. Check the signature. I have proof." My heart, which had been sinking like a stone, suddenly felt light as air. I looked up at Jasmine, who was smirking at me now, not even trying to hide it anymore. Then I looked at the lawyer reading the will, some young man named Preston Ford that I'd never seen before in my life. I smiled, really smiled, the kind of smile that made Jasmine's smirk falter. "That's beautiful," I said, my voice steady as Sunday morning. "That signature is just beautiful. Walter always did have distinctive handwriting." I stood up slowly, smoothing down my black dress. "Mr. Ford, would you mind if we took a short break? I have something in my car that I think everyone needs to see." Before we continue, if this story resonates with you, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our next story. Now, let me tell you how I got to that moment. Let me tell you about the 3 months that led up to this, and how a woman who'd been married for 43 years nearly lost everything to a snake in designer heels. Walter and I met at a church barbecue in 1981. I was 22, fresh out of nursing school, and he was 25, working construction and dreaming big. He had these plans, you see. Big plans about starting his own company, building affordable housing in black neighborhoods that banks had forgotten about. Back then, people thought he was crazy. But I saw something in Walter Hayes. I saw a man who meant what he said. We got married 6 months later at Macedonia Baptist Church, with Reverend Johnson presiding, and my mama crying so hard she had to sit down halfway through. Walter's mama, God rest her soul, gave me her grandmother's wedding ring because we couldn't afford a new one. That ring sat on my finger for 43 years. Never once came off. We had DeAndre in 1983 and Tanya in 1986. Those were hard years. Walter was building the business, working 18-hour days, coming home with sawdust in his hair and concrete dust on his clothes. I worked night shifts at the hospital so I could watch the babies during the day while he worked. We barely saw each other some weeks, but we never stopped believing in the dream. By the mid-90s, Hayes Construction was the name people called when they wanted quality work in the community. Walter built churches, community centers, affordable housing. He hired from the neighborhood, trained young men who needed a chance. He wasn't just building buildings, he was building futures. We bought our house in 1995, a beautiful 4-bedroom in a neighborhood where we could hear the church bells on Sunday morning and smell Mrs. Patterson's sweet potato pie from 3 houses down. We had finally made it. Our kids went to good schools, we had barbecues in the backyard, and every Sunday, our house was full of family and friends. Walter's business kept growing. By 2020, Hayes Construction had 40 employees and contracts all over the city. That's when he hired Jasmine. I remember the day he told me about her. "Corinne, I hired an assistant," he said over dinner. "Someone to help with the paperwork and scheduling. I'm getting too old to keep track of all these bids and contracts." He was 71 then, and I'd been after him to slow down for years. His diabetes was getting worse, his blood pressure was high, and the doctors said stress wasn't helping. So I was glad he was getting help. "What's her name?" I asked. "Jasmine Carter, sharp as a tack, just finished her business degree. She'll be good for the company." The first time I met Jasmine, something felt off. It was at the company holiday party at Walter's office. She was beautiful, I'll give her that. Tall, confident, with one of those bright smiles that made you want to trust her. But when Walter introduced us, she looked at me like I was furniture. Like I was something old that didn't quite fit with the modern decor. "Mrs. Hayes," she said, barely shaking my hand. "Walter talks about you all the time." But the way she said it felt wrong, like she was humoring me. Over the next year, I started noticing changes. Walter came home later and later. "Jasmine needed help with the Riverside project," he'd say. Or, "Jasmine found some errors in the old contracts we need to fix." Always Jasmine. Then came his diagnosis in January of last year. Stage 4 kidney disease. The doctor said his diabetes had finally caught up with him. He'd need dialysis 3 times a week, maybe a transplant if he was lucky enough to get on the list. I was there for every appointment, every treatment. I held his hand when the needles went in. I made sure he ate right. I rearranged my entire life around keeping him comfortable. That's what you do when you love someone for 43 years. But Jasmine was always there too. At the office, handling business while Walter was sick. Then at the hospital, bringing him files to review. Then at our house, because Walter needed to sign some papers. "Corinne, I don't know what I'd do without Jasmine keeping the business running," Walter said one night after she'd left. We were sitting in our living room, the same one where we'd watched our kids grow up, where we'd celebrated every holiday and birthday. "I'm glad you have good help," I said. But in my heart, alarm bells were ringing. The really strange thing started in May. Walter asked me to sign some papers. "Just business stuff," he said. "Reorganizing the company structure." I should have read them more carefully, but I trusted my husband. After 43 years, why wouldn't I? Then there was the day I came home early from church choir practice and found Jasmine in our kitchen with Walter. They weren't doing anything wrong exactly, but the way they went quiet when I walked in made my stomach twist. "Just going over some contracts," Walter said quickly. Jasmine smiled at me, that same furniture smile. "I should go. Feel better, Walter." After she left, I said, "Walter, is there something you need to tell me?" He looked at me with those tired eyes I'd loved for over 40 years. "Corinne, baby, you're imagining things. Jasmine is just helping keep my life's work going while I'm sick. That's all." I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him. In July, Walter's condition got worse. The dialysis wasn't working as well. He was weak, tired all the time. I took a leave from my part-time nursing job at the community clinic to take care of him full-time. That's when Jasmine really moved in on everything. She was at our house almost every day, bringing papers for Walter to sign, updating him on projects, making sure everything is handled. DeAndre and Tanya noticed too. "Mama, I don't like how that woman is always here," Tanya said one Sunday after church. We were in my kitchen making dinner while Walter rested. "Something feels wrong." "Your daddy says she's just helping with business," I replied, but I didn't even convince myself. DeAndre, who'd followed his father into construction and worked at Hayes Construction, was more direct. Mama, something's not right with the books. I tried to ask Dad about some transfers and he got defensive. Then Jasmine told me to mind my business. What kind of transfers? I asked. Big ones? Moving money around? Dad's name is on them, but... He shook his head. I don't know, Mama. Just watch your back. On August 15th, Walter died. Peaceful, in his sleep, in our bed. I held his hand all night, talking to him even though he couldn't answer. Telling him about our life, about how much I loved him, about how I'd miss him every day for the rest of mine. At the funeral, Jasmine sat in the front row like family, cried pretty tears that didn't mess up her makeup, and when people gave me their condolences, she stood right there beside me like she had some claim to my husband. The real shock came 2 weeks later when Preston Ford called me. Mrs. Hayes, I'm the attorney for the Hayes estate. We need to schedule a will reading. I'll call Harold Mitchell, I said. Harold had been Walter's lawyer forever, drew up our wills together back in 2015. I'm afraid Mr. Mitchell no longer represents the estate. Your husband retained my services last month. We need you, your children, and Miss Jasmine Carter present. That's when I knew something was very, very wrong. I called Harold immediately. Did Walter fire you? Fire me? Corinne, I've been trying to reach you. Walter didn't fire me. I retired last year, yes, but Walter never told me he was getting a new lawyer. In fact, the last will I have on file leaves everything to you, with trust funds for DeAndre and Tanya. This new lawyer says there's a different will. Harold was quiet for a long moment. Corinne, don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. Let me make some calls. The will reading was set for 3 days later. Those 3 days felt like 3 years. I prayed more than I'd ever prayed in my life. I sat in Macedonia Baptist Church, in the same pew where Walter and I used to sit every Sunday, and I asked God for strength. On the morning of the reading, my friend Geneva from church came by. Geneva had known Walter and me since before we were married. She made me breakfast, helped me pick out what to wear, and held my hand while I cried. God's got you, Corinne, she said. Whatever happens, He's got you. I walked into that conference room with my head high. DeAndre and Tanya were already there, looking nervous. Then Jasmine walked in like she owned the place, checking her phone, confident. And that's when Preston Ford read that will. The will that gave my whole life to a stranger. That's when I got Harold's text. And that's when everything changed. I excused myself, walked out to the parking lot, and found Harold waiting by his car. He looked older than when I'd last seen him, more gray in his hair, but his eyes were sharp. Corinne, he said, pulling out a folder. I did some digging. Look at this. He showed me the will he had on file, the one from 2015. Then he showed me the one Preston Ford had inside. The signatures didn't match, not even close. But there's more, Harold said. I contacted a forensic document examiner friend of mine. Rush job, cost me a favor, but look. He showed me the analysis. The will Preston has? The signature was traced, probably from a real document, but traced onto this new will. And look at the date it was supposedly signed. My hands shook as I read. The date was July 30th, just 2 weeks before Walter died. He could barely hold a pen by then, I whispered. He was so weak. Exactly. And there's no witness signatures from anyone we can verify. The notary stamp? I called. That notary hasn't worked in the area for 5 years. So it's fake. Someone made a fake will. Someone made a fake will, Harold confirmed. And I'd bet my retirement that someone is sitting in that conference room right now thinking she got away with it. We walked back into that conference room together, Harold carrying his folder like a sword. I sat back down and every eye was on me. Preston Ford looked annoyed. Jasmine looked impatient. My children looked confused. Everything all right, Mrs. Hayes? Preston asked. Oh, Everything is perfect, I said. I looked at Jasmine. Jasmine, honey, I just have one question. She raised an eyebrow. Yes? When exactly did Walter sign this new will? July 30th, Preston answered for her. As stated in the document. That's interesting, I said. Because on July 30th, Walter was in the hospital. He'd been admitted the night before with complications. He was there for 5 days. I have the records. Jasmine's confident smile flickered. Just for a second, but I saw it. Mr. Ford, I continued, could you show me that signature again? He pushed the will across the table. I pulled out my phone and brought up a photo. Walter's signature from a birthday card he'd given me in June, just 2 months before he died. His handwriting was shaky from the illness, but it was his. The signature on the will was perfect. Too perfect. Strong, confident lines that Walter hadn't been capable of making in months. That's not my husband's signature, I said clearly. Jasmine stood up. That's ridiculous. Walter signed that will in front of witnesses. Then produce them, Harold said, speaking for the first time. He placed his folder on the table. Because I have Walter's actual will right here, signed in 2015, witnessed and notarized properly. And I have a forensic analysis of the signature on your will, Mr. Ford. Preston Ford's face went pale. Who are you? Harold Mitchell, Walter Hayes's attorney for 20 years, and I'm about to make your day very interesting. Jasmine's face had gone from confident to trapped. She looked at Preston, then at the door, then back at me. Corinne, she started, her voice honey-sweet again. There's been a misunderstanding. Walter wanted to take care of me because I took such good care of him during his illness. You can't blame him for being grateful. Grateful? My voice came out stronger than I expected. You forged my husband's will. You tried to steal everything he spent 43 years building, everything we built together. You can't prove anything, she hissed, dropping the sweet act. Actually, Harold said, pulling out more papers, I can prove quite a lot, like the fact that $300,000 was transferred from Hayes' construction accounts to your personal account over the past 6 months. Transfers that Walter's signature was on, but that his son says he never authorized. DeAndre stood up. I tried to tell you, Mama. She's been stealing from the company for months. Jasmine grabbed her purse. I don't have to listen to this. Sit down, Miss Carter, Harold said firmly, because the police are on their way. And that's when Jasmine did something I'll never forget. She lunged across that table, trying to grab the will, trying to destroy the evidence. DeAndre caught her arm, and she screamed like a wild animal. He promised me, she shrieked. He said he'd take care of me. I took care of him when you were too busy with your church and your friends. I was there. You were there stealing from him, I said quietly. You were there forging documents and manipulating a sick, dying man. The police arrived 10 minutes later. As they led Jasmine out in handcuffs, she looked at me one last time. You'll never prove he didn't want me to have it. You'll never prove I didn't earn it. I looked her right in the eyes and said, I already did. After she was gone, Harold explained everything. Jasmine had been systematically manipulating Walter for over a year. The papers I'd signed in May? She'd told Walter they were standard business reorganization, but they actually gave her signing authority on some accounts. The transfers DeAndre noticed? All her, using Walter's declining health to cover her tracks. The will was her final play, Harold said. She probably figured by the time anyone questioned it, she'd have liquidated everything and disappeared. Preston Ford, it turned out, was Jasmine's boyfriend. He wasn't even a real estate lawyer. He'd passed the bar, barely, and she'd convinced him to help her. He was in custody too now. But here's what Jasmine didn't know, what she couldn't have known. That night, as I lay in bed in the house that was still mine, I got a call from Harold. Corinne, there's something else. Something I found in Walter's real documents that I think you need to know about. What is it? I asked, suddenly afraid all over again. Your husband knew, Harold said softly. Walter knew what Jasmine was doing. My heart stopped. What do you mean he knew? Harold's voice was gentle but firm. Corinne, can I come over? This isn't something we should discuss on the phone. 20 minutes later, Harold was sitting at my kitchen table, the same table where Walter and I had shared thousands of meals, where we'd helped our kids with homework, where we'd planned our future. Geneva had stayed with me, refusing to leave me alone, and now she sat beside me, holding my hand. Harold opened his briefcase and pulled out a leather notebook. I recognized it immediately. Walter's journal, the one he'd kept since starting his business. Where did you get that? I asked. Walter gave it to me, 3 weeks before he died. Harold opened it to a marked page. Corinne, your husband came to see me in early July. He told me he couldn't use me officially as his lawyer anymore because Jasmine was watching everything, but he needed my help with something important. I stared at the journal, Walter's handwriting swimming before my eyes. I don't understand. Walter knew Jasmine was stealing. He'd known for months, but he wanted to catch her completely, with evidence that would hold up in court. Harold slid the journal toward me. He documented everything. My hands trembled as I picked up the journal and started reading. June 3rd. Noticed another unauthorized transfer today. $15,000 to an account I don't recognize. When I asked Jasmine about it, she had an answer ready. Too ready. She's been practicing her lies. June 10th. She brought another document for me to sign today. Said it was for the Riverside project. But I recognized the language. It was changing beneficiaries on one of my life insurance policies. I signed it anyway. Let her think she's winning. June 18th. Corinne asked me today if something was wrong. God, I hate lying to my wife. But if she knows, she'll confront Jasmine and Jasmine will run. I need more time. Harold says we need documentation of at least 6 months of theft to make the case airtight. June 25th. I'm getting sicker. The doctors say it won't be long. I'm running out of time, but so is she. Harold has people tracking every transfer, every forged signature. When this is over, Corinne will get everything back, plus what Jasmine stole. That girl thought she could outsmart a man who built a business from nothing. She forgot I grew up with nothing to lose. I couldn't read anymore. Tears were streaming down my face. He knew. He knew the whole time and he didn't tell me. He was protecting you, Harold said. And he was building a case. Walter contacted a forensic accountant, a private investigator, even had cameras installed in his office that Jasmine didn't know about. He recorded her forging his signature, stealing money, even trying to get him to change his will. But why not just fire her? Why not call the police right away? Harold leaned back in his chair. Because Walter knew how these things work. A smart thief covers their tracks. Jasmine had convinced half the company she was indispensable. She'd forged documents that made her look legitimate. If Walter had just fired her, she could claim discrimination, wrongful termination, anything. And some of the money might have been impossible to recover. But if he'd arrested her immediately with what he had, Geneva started. She had a boyfriend who's a lawyer, remember? Harold said. Preston might be a snake, but he knows enough to poke holes in a weak case. Walter wanted overwhelming evidence. He wanted to make sure that when this went to court, Jasmine would go to prison and every penny would come back to his family. I wiped my eyes and kept reading the journal. July 8th. Today Jasmine suggested I change my will completely, leave everything to her. Said Corinne would be fine, that she had her nursing pension. Said DeAndre and Tanya were adults and didn't need help. Had the audacity to say I owed her for all her hard work. I smiled and said I'd think about it. Harold is ready. The accountant has traced $340,000 in theft. It's almost time. July 15th. I'm in the hospital. Kidney failure is getting worse. Jasmine came to visit, brought papers, wanted me to sign them right here in the hospital bed. I told her I was too weak. She actually looked angry, showed her true face for just a second. That's when I knew. She's not going to wait much longer. She's going to make her move soon. July 28th, final entry. I'm home now, but barely hanging on. Harold came by while Corinne was at church. Gave him everything. The journal, the evidence, instructions. If I don't make it to see this through, he knows what to do. My only regret is that Corinne will be hurt before she knows the truth. But my baby is strong. Strongest woman I ever met. She'll survive this, and she'll come out on top. She always does. To my love, I'm sorry for the secrets, but I did it to protect what we built together. Don't let that girl take what's yours. Fight her with everything you have. I'll be watching from heaven, cheering you on. I closed the journal and sat there crying. Not sad tears anymore, but angry ones, grateful ones, confused ones, all mixed together. He set a trap, I said finally. He set a trap and used himself as bait. Yes, Harold confirmed, and it worked. Jasmine thought she'd gotten away with everything. She made the fake will, thinking no one would question it because I'd retired and she'd convinced Walter to use Preston instead. But Walter had already given me everything I needed to prove fraud. But why didn't he tell me? I asked again. Why did he let me think? Because you're a terrible liar, Corinne, Geneva said gently. You know that. If Walter had told you, you would have looked at that girl different. She would have known something was wrong. She was right. I couldn't have kept that secret. I would have shown my hand. So what happens now? I asked Harold. Now? Now we destroy her. Harold's eyes were hard. We have evidence of embezzlement, fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and probably a dozen other charges. The DA is already building a case, but there's more. He pulled out another folder. The private investigator Walter hired found some interesting things. Jasmine Carter isn't even her real name. She's actually Jasmine Nicole Rodriguez. She's done this before, in Atlanta 3 years ago. Worked for an elderly man with a successful real estate business, convinced him to change his will, but his family caught on before he died. She left town before charges could be filed. She's a professional, I breathed. A professional predator, Harold corrected. She targets successful older men, usually men whose wives have passed or who are divorced. Walter was supposed to be an easy mark, sick, vulnerable, supposedly unhappy in his marriage. Unhappy? I nearly shouted. We were married for 43 years. She didn't understand that, Harold said. People like Jasmine don't understand real love. They only understand what they can take. Over the next few days, the full scope of what Walter had done became clear. He'd left me not just evidence, but a complete battle plan. Letters to be opened at specific times. Instructions for Harold. Even a video he'd recorded 2 weeks before he died. Harold showed me the video on his laptop. There was Walter, thin and weak, but clear-eyed, sitting in Harold's office. Baby, he said, looking right into the camera. If you're seeing this, I'm gone, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't tell you what was happening. I'm sorry you had to go through that will reading and feel like I betrayed you. But I need you to know something. Everything I did, every breath I took, every decision I made for 43 years was for you, for us, for our family. He paused, coughing. That girl thought she could take what we built. She thought she could steal our life, but she forgot something. She forgot that you don't build what we built without learning how to fight. And you don't stay married for 43 years without trusting each other completely. Another pause. Corinne Marie Hayes, you are the strongest, smartest, most beautiful woman I have ever known. You stood by me when I had nothing but dreams. You believed in me when nobody else did. You gave me 2 beautiful children and a life beyond anything I deserved. So I'm asking you now, finish what I started. Take that evidence and you fight. You fight for our house, our business, our legacy. You fight for DeAndre and Tanya and those grandchildren. You show that girl what happens when you mess with the Hayes family. He smiled then. That smile I'd fallen in love with 43 years ago. I love you, baby. Always have, always will. Even death can't change that. Now go get what's yours. The video ended and I sat there, tears streaming down my face, feeling Walter's love wrap around me like a warm blanket. He really loved you, Geneva whispered. I know, I said. I always knew. The next week, I met with the district attorney, a sharp woman named Regina Phillips. She laid out the case against Jasmine and Preston. Mrs. Hayes, this is one of the most documented fraud cases I've seen, Regina said. Your husband gave us a gift. We have video evidence, financial records, expert testimony on the forged signatures, and now we've connected Jasmine to the Atlanta case. She's looking at 10 to 15 years, minimum. What about Preston? I asked. He's trying to make a deal, wants to testify against Jasmine in exchange for a lighter sentence. Regina shook her head. But he's going to prison too. They both are. Good, I said firmly. Then I asked the question that had been bothering me. The money she stole, can we get it back? Most of it, yes. She's already spent some of it, but we've frozen her accounts. The court will order restitution. But here's where things got complicated. Because of Jasmine's theft and the legal battle ahead, Hayes Construction was in trouble. DeAndre called a meeting with all the employees, the men Walter had trained, many of them young black men from the neighborhood who'd found purpose and good wages working for him. I'm not going to lie to you, DeAndre told them, standing in the workshop where his father had stood for 30 years. We're in a tough spot. Miss Carter stole a lot of money, and with Dad gone, we're struggling. Some of you might not get paid on time. Some projects might have to be delayed. I watched these men, some of them boys when Walter hired them, now fathers themselves. I saw their worried faces, thinking about their own families, their own bills. Then Jerome Williams, who'd worked for Walter for 20 years, stood up. DeAndre, your daddy gave me my first job when I got out of prison. Nobody else would hire me, but Walter Hayes said everyone deserves a second chance. Now it's our turn. We'll take pay cuts if we need to. We'll work extra hours. But we're not letting Hayes Construction go under, not while we're still breathing. One by one, every single worker in that room agreed. They voted to take temporary pay cuts, to work longer hours, to do whatever it took to save the company. I stood there watching, and I understood something Walter had built more than just a business. He'd built a family, a community. That Sunday, Reverend Thompson at Macedonia Baptist Church dedicated the entire service to our situation. The church had known Walter and me for over 40 years. They'd watched our children grow up, celebrated our anniversaries, mourned with us at Walter's funeral. The Hayes family is under attack, Reverend Thompson preached. But when one of us is under attack, we all fight back. This is what community means. This is what family means. After the service, people lined up to hug me, to pray with me, to slip envelopes of money into my purse. For the legal fees, they whispered, for whatever you need. Geneva organized a fundraiser at the church. The women's auxiliary made a dinner: fried chicken, collard greens, macaroni and cheese, sweet potato pie, and sold plates. They raised $5,000 in one night. But the real battle was in court. Jasmine's arraignment came 2 weeks after her arrest. I sat in that courtroom with DeAndre, Tanya, Harold, and Geneva, and I watched her walk in wearing an orange jumpsuit, her perfect hair pulled back, no makeup, looking nothing like the confident woman who'd tried to steal my life. When the judge read the charges, 11 counts of fraud, forgery, embezzlement, and conspiracy, her face crumbled. Preston sat separately, already wearing a suit again, having posted bail and looking like he wanted to disappear. "How do you plead?" the judge asked Jasmine. "Not guilty," she whispered. But I saw it in her eyes. She knew she was caught. She knew Walter had outsmarted her from beyond the grave. The trial was set for 3 months later, 3 months of lawyers and depositions and evidence review. 3 months of people whispering when I went to the grocery store, of news stories about the elder fraud case that shocked the community. But here's what those 3 months also brought. They brought my family closer together. DeAndre and Tanya took over running Hayes Construction together, brother and sister working side by side like their father had dreamed. They brought the business back from the edge, secured new contracts, repaired the damage Jasmine had done. They brought my church family around me like armor. Every Sunday I sat in my pew and I felt their prayers lifting me up. Every Wednesday, at Bible study, we prayed for justice and mercy. Justice for our family. Mercy for Jasmine's soul, even though she didn't deserve it. And they brought something else. Something I didn't expect. One evening, about 2 months after the arrest, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find a woman I'd never seen before, maybe 50 years old, well-dressed, nervous. "Mrs. Hayes? My name is Patricia Montgomery. I need to talk to you about Jasmine Rodriguez." I invited her in, made tea, and listened to her story. 7 years ago, Patricia said, Jasmine worked for my father in Atlanta. He was a widower, owned a successful accounting firm. She convinced him she loved him. He was going to marry her, change his will, everything. But my brother noticed money missing and we investigated. We found out about the theft, confronted her, and she disappeared before we could press charges. "Why didn't you?" I asked. Dad was embarrassed. He didn't want people to know he'd been fooled. So we just let it go. Patricia's hands shook as she held her teacup. But then I saw her face on the news, saw what she did to your family, and I knew I had to come forward. "Will you testify?" I asked. "I'll do whatever helps put her away," Patricia said firmly. "My father died last year, still embarrassed about what happened. Maybe if I'd pushed harder to press charges then, she wouldn't have hurt your family now." "That's not your fault," I told her. "But your testimony will help. It shows a pattern." Patricia's testimony was added to the case. Then Regina found 2 more victims, men in other states who'd been targeted by Jasmine, but had caught on before losing everything. The pattern was clear. Jasmine Rodriguez was a predator who'd been doing this for at least a decade. The night before the trial started, I sat in my living room with my children and grandchildren around me. Little Zion, DeAndre's 6-year-old son, climbed into my lap. "Grandma, why are you sad?" he asked. "I'm not sad, baby," I said, holding him close. "I'm just thinking about your granddaddy." "Daddy says granddaddy was a hero," Zion said. "Says he caught the bad lady." Out of the mouths of babes. "Yes, honey. Your granddaddy was a hero." That night, I prayed harder than I'd prayed in my entire life. I prayed for strength for the trial. I prayed for justice. I prayed for peace. And I prayed that Walter, wherever he was, knew that I was about to finish what he started. The trial began on a Monday morning in October. The courthouse was packed. News cameras, community members, employees from Hayes Construction, members of Macedonia Baptist Church. Harold said it was the biggest fraud trial the county had seen in 20 years. I wore my best suit, the one I'd worn to Walter's funeral, and I walked into that courtroom with my head high. Jasmine sat at the defense table, and when our eyes met, I didn't look away. I wanted her to see that I wasn't broken, that she hadn't won. The prosecutor's opening statement laid it all out. The timeline of theft, the forged signatures, the fake will, the pattern of fraud across multiple states. Then the defense attorney stood up, and that's when he said something that made my blood run cold. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he said smoothly, "this is not a case about theft. This is a case about a dying man who fell in love with a younger woman and wanted to take care of her. This is about a widow's jealousy and a family's greed. And my client is the victim here." The defense attorney's words hung in the courtroom like poison gas. A dying man who fell in love? A widow's jealousy? I felt Tanya's hand grip mine so hard it hurt. But Harold just smiled. He leaned over and whispered, "Just wait. They have no idea what's coming." The first week of trial was hard. Jasmine's lawyer painted her as a devoted employee who'd fallen in love with her boss. He showed pictures of her at Walter's bedside in the hospital, reading to him. He had character witnesses who said she was kind and hardworking. Mr. Hayes was trapped in a loveless marriage, the defense attorney said. He confided in Miss Rodriguez that he and his wife had grown apart, that he felt more like roommates than spouses, that he wanted to start over. I sat there listening to lies about my marriage, about my husband, and it took everything in me not to scream. But Harold had coached me. "Let them talk," he'd said. "Let them dig their hole deeper. Then we'll bury them in it." On the third day, they called me to the stand. Jasmine's lawyer circled me like a shark. "Mrs. Hayes, isn't it true that you and your husband had separate bedrooms?" "Yes," I said calmly, "because Walter's dialysis machine was loud, and he didn't want to disturb my sleep. I still sat with him every night until he fell asleep." "Isn't it true that you were often gone, at church or with friends?" "I attended church twice a week and Bible study on Wednesdays. The same schedule I'd kept for 40 years. Walter encouraged it." "Isn't it true that you signed documents giving your husband's assistant access to accounts?" "I signed papers my husband asked me to sign. Papers I was told were routine business matters. I trusted my husband." The lawyer smirked. "So you admit you weren't involved in the business? That you didn't really know what was going on?" I looked right at him. "I trusted my husband to run his business, just like he trusted me to manage our home and family for 43 years. That's what marriage is. Trust." "But that trust was misplaced, wasn't it? Because your husband was planning to leave everything to Miss Rodriguez." "No," I said firmly. "That trust was justified, because my husband knew exactly what Miss Rodriguez was doing. And he was building a case against her while she thought she was fooling him." The lawyer's smirk faded. "That's speculation." "No," Harold said, standing up. "It's fact. And we're about to prove it." The prosecutor began our case, and it was devastating. The forensic accountant walked through every stolen dollar, every forged signature, every fraudulent transfer. $347,000 over 18 months. The handwriting expert showed how Jasmine had traced Walter's signature onto the fake will, explaining in detail how the pressure points were wrong, how the ink was different, how it was physically impossible for Walter to have signed it, given his condition at the supposed date. DeAndre testified about the unauthorized transfers, about Jasmine blocking his access to accounts, about finding discrepancies that made no sense. Then Patricia Montgomery took the stand and told her story. Then the two other victims. The pattern was undeniable, but the most powerful moment came when Harold played Walter's video. The courtroom went silent as my husband appeared on the screen, weak but clear-minded, speaking from beyond the grave. "My name is Walter James Hayes," he said. "I'm making this video on July 28, 2024, as insurance. Because if you're seeing this, it means Jasmine Rodriguez tried to steal everything I built." For 20 minutes, Walter walked through everything he'd discovered. He showed documents with Jasmine's real signature next to forged ones. He played audio recordings from his office, recordings where Jasmine talked about finally getting what she deserved, and that old man won't last much longer. One recording made everyone in the courtroom gasp. It was Jasmine on the phone with Preston. "He's almost gone," she said. "Maybe another week. Then we just need to wait a month after the funeral, present the will, and we're set. The wife won't know what hit her." "What if she contests it?" Preston's voice asked. "She won't. She's too trusting, too naive. By the time she figures it out, we'll have liquidated everything and be on a beach somewhere." The jury looked at Jasmine with disgust. Several jurors were shaking their heads. But Walter wasn't done. The final part of the video was addressed directly to Jasmine. "Miss Rodriguez," Walter said, looking into the camera with steel in his eyes, "you thought you were clever. You thought you could prey on a sick old man and his trusting family. But you forgot something. I didn't build a successful business by being stupid. I built it by being smarter than people who tried to take advantage of me." He coughed, then continued. "You see, I knew what you were from the moment you started asking too many questions about my personal finances. I knew when you started making moves to isolate me from my family. I recognized the pattern because I've seen predators before. So I let you think you were winning. I let you steal, let you forge, let you plan. Because I knew that the more you took, the longer you'd go to prison." Walter smiled then, that fierce smile that had intimidated competitors for 40 years. "And now, wherever I am, I'm watching you realize that you lost, that you gambled everything on fooling Walter Hayes, and Walter Hayes fooled you instead. I hope it was worth it." When the video ended, Jasmine was crying. Not pretty tears anymore, but ugly, desperate sobs. Preston was white as a sheet. The defense tried to recover. They argued the recordings were taken out of context, that Walter was confused from medication, that the video was coerced. But then Harold played his final card. "Your Honor, I'd like to call a witness we just added to our list. Dr. Marcus Chen, Mr. Hayes's primary physician." Dr. Chen took the stand and testified that Walter's mental capacity was perfect until the day he died. Despite his physical decline, Mr. Hayes was sharp, clear-minded, and fully competent to make legal decisions. "Doctor," Harold asked, "did Mr. Hayes ever express confusion about his family or his wishes?" "Never. He talked about his wife constantly, how much he loved her, how they were a team. He talked about wanting to protect his family from someone he believed was trying to harm them." "Did he mention who?" "Yes. His assistant, Jasmine Rodriguez. He said she was trying to steal from him, but he was gathering evidence." The defense attorney jumped up. "Objection! Hearsay!" "Your Honor," Harold said calmly, "Mr. Hayes's state of mind is directly relevant to this case. The defense has argued he wanted to leave everything to Miss Rodriguez. His own doctor testifying that he felt the opposite is crucial." The judge allowed it. On the final day of testimony, the prosecutor brought everything together. The theft, the forgery, the fake will, the pattern of fraud. It took 3 hours to walk through all the evidence. Then it was time for closing arguments. The defense attorney tried his best. He painted Jasmine as a naive young woman who'd been seduced by a rich older man, then abandoned by his bitter wife. But when the prosecutor stood up, she destroyed that narrative. "Ladies and gentlemen," Regina Phillips said, "you've seen the evidence, you've heard the testimony. You've watched Walter Hayes explain from beyond the grave how Jasmine Rodriguez tried to steal his life's work. The defense wants you to believe this was a love story. But this wasn't love. This was a con. This was a predator who found a vulnerable victim and decided to take everything." She walked over to the evidence table and picked up Walter's journal. Walter Hayes spent his last months on Earth building a case against the woman who was stealing from him. He didn't tell his wife because he wanted to protect her. He didn't fire Jasmine immediately because he wanted to make sure she couldn't get away with it. He was dying, in pain, struggling to breathe, and he used his last energy to make sure justice would be served. Regina turned to the jury. "The defense says Corinne Hayes is acting out of jealousy. But let me ask you this. If you'd been married to someone for 43 years, if you'd built a life together, raised children together, survived every challenge together, and then someone tried to steal all of it with forged documents and lies, wouldn't you fight back? Wouldn't you demand justice?" She paused, letting it sink in. "This isn't about jealousy. It's about right and wrong. It's about a man who loved his wife enough to protect her even after death. And it's about holding accountable a woman who has done this before and will do it again if you don't stop her right now." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. 6 hours that felt like 6 years. I sat in the hallway with my family, with Geneva, with members from my church, waiting. When the bailiff finally called us back, my heart was pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" the judge asked. "We have, Your Honor." "On the charge of fraud in the first degree, how do you find?" "Guilty." "On the charge of forgery in the first degree, how do you find?" "Guilty, guilty, guilty, guilty." 11 times the jury foreman said that word, and each time felt like a weight lifting off my chest. Jasmine collapsed at the defense table. Preston, who'd taken a plea deal and testified against her, sat in the back of the courtroom looking relieved that his sentence would be lighter. The judge set sentencing for 2 weeks later. When that day came, I was there again, sitting in the front row. "Miss Rodriguez," the judge said, looking down at Jasmine with cold eyes, "you targeted a dying man and his family. You stole not just money, but trust. You violated the sanctity of someone's final wishes. You did this with planning and malice, and you have a history of similar behavior." The judge sentenced her to 15 years in prison. Preston got 5 years for his part in the conspiracy. As they led Jasmine away, she looked at me one last time. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just looked back at her with the same steady gaze I'd had since this all began. Outside the courthouse, news cameras swarmed us. But I only had one thing to say. My husband was a good man who built something meaningful. He protected his family even in death. And today, justice was served. That's all. The recovery wasn't instant. Hayes Construction still had debts to pay, damage to repair. But with the restitution from Jasmine's frozen accounts and the insurance payout that had been held up during the investigation, we stabilized. DeAndre and Tanya ran the company together, and they ran it well. They hired more people from the community, just like their father had. They bid on projects Walter would have been proud of. The house, my house, the house Walter and I had bought in 1995, stayed mine. Every room still held our memories. I could still feel him there, in the creaky board in the hallway, in the spot on the couch where he always sat, in the garden he'd planted for me. 6 months after the trial, on what would have been Walter's 75th birthday, the company finished a project he'd started before he got sick, a community center in the neighborhood where we'd first lived as newlyweds, the place where we'd struggled and dreamed and believed. At the opening ceremony, Reverend Thompson said a prayer. Geneva stood beside me, holding my hand like she had through everything. DeAndre and Tanya cut the ribbon. And above the door, they unveiled a plaque. The Walter James Hayes Community Center, built with love, integrity, and the belief that everyone deserves a chance. I stood there crying, surrounded by the community Walter and I had been part of for over 40 years. The people who'd supported us, prayed for us, fought alongside us. "He'd be proud," Geneva whispered. "I know," I said. "I know he would." That night, I sat in my living room with Walter's journal in my lap. I read through his final entries again, hearing his voice in every word. But this time, I also wrote. I added my own entry to the end of his journal. "Dear Walter, you were right. I fought. I fought with everything I had, just like you asked me to. And we won. Not because I was stronger than Jasmine, but because you prepared me. Because you loved me enough to protect me even when you were dying. 43 years wasn't enough time with you. 100 years wouldn't have been enough. But the time we had was real. And it was ours. And nobody can ever take that away. The kids are doing well. Hayes Construction is thriving. Your grandchildren are growing up strong. And I'm still here, still standing, still fighting for everything we built together. You said I was the strongest woman you ever knew, but baby, you made me strong. Your love made me strong. Until we meet again, Corinne." I closed the journal and looked at Walter's picture on the mantel, his smile, his eyes, the man I'd loved for 43 years. "We did it, baby," I whispered. "We showed her what happens when you mess with the Hayes family." And I could almost hear him laugh, that deep rumbling laugh I'd fallen in love with at a church barbecue in 1981. Life went on. I still went to church twice a week. I still had Sunday dinners with my children and grandchildren. I still made sweet potato pie from Walter's mama's recipe. I still lived in our house, surrounded by our memories. But I was different now. Stronger. Not because of what I'd been through, but because I'd learned something important. Love doesn't end at death. Real love, the kind Walter and I had, it transcends everything. It protects. It fights. It endures. Jasmine thought she could take what we'd built. She thought a piece of paper and some forged signatures could erase 43 years of partnership, of struggle, of triumph. But she forgot that you can't forge love. You can't fake commitment. You can't steal what's built on truth. And in the end, truth always wins. A year after the trial, I got a letter from Jasmine in prison. It sat on my kitchen table for 3 days before I opened it. Mrs. Hayes, it read, I know you won't believe me, but I'm sorry. I've had a lot of time to think about what I did. I told myself I deserved that money, that I'd earned it. But the truth is, I was jealous. Jealous of what you and Walter had. I've never had anyone love me the way he loved you. I thought I could buy that feeling with money. I was wrong. I read the letter twice. Then I did something I didn't expect to do. I wrote back, Jasmine, I forgive you. Not because what you did was okay. It wasn't. Not because you deserve forgiveness. You don't. But because carrying hate around is too heavy, and I've got better things to do with the time I have left. You took a lot from my family. Money, time, peace of mind. But you couldn't take what mattered. You couldn't take our love, our memories, our strength. I hope you use your time in prison to become a better person. I hope you learn that real wealth isn't in bank accounts. It's in the people who stand by you, who fight for you, who love you even when things get hard. I had that wealth for 43 years, and I'll carry it with me for the rest of my life. Corinne Hayes. I never heard from her again, and that was fine. I'd said what I needed to say. 2 years after Walter died, on our anniversary, I visited his grave. I brought flowers, roses his favorite, and I sat on the bench nearby. Hey baby, I said. It's our 45th anniversary. Well, would have been. I'm counting it anyway. I told him about the grandchildren, about the business, about the community center that bore his name. I told him about the scholarship fund we'd started in his honor, helping young people from the neighborhood go to college or trade school. You built something that lasted, I said. Not just a business, but a legacy. And I'm going to make sure that legacy keeps growing. As I sat there, a young woman approached. She looked nervous, maybe 19 or 20. Excuse me, she said. Are you Mrs. Hayes? I am. I just wanted to say thank you. I got the Hayes Construction Scholarship last year. It paid for my first year at engineering school. Mr. Hayes' story, how he built something from nothing, that inspired me. I want to do the same thing. I smiled at her, this young woman with dreams in her eyes, and I saw Walter in her determination. What's your name, sweetheart? Destiny. Destiny Wright. Well, Destiny, my husband would have loved meeting you. He believed everyone deserves a chance to build something meaningful. You make sure you take that chance and run with it. Yes, ma'am. I will. After she left, I looked at Walter's gravestone. See what you started? I said. It's bigger than either of us now. The wind picked up, rustling through the trees, and for just a moment, I felt Walter's presence as real as if he were sitting beside me. I love you, I whispered. Always have, always will. And I knew, wherever he was saying the same thing back. I walked out of that cemetery with my head high, ready to face whatever came next. because I'd learned something through all of this. You can't steal what's built on love. You can't forge what's built on truth. And you can't break what's built to last. Walter and I had built something to last, and it would keep lasting, through our children, through our grandchildren, through every person his legacy touched. During that will reading, I got a text that changed everything. But looking back now, I realize the text didn't change anything. It just revealed what was always true. That love wins, that truth wins, that family wins, and that when you mess with someone who spent 43 years building something real, you better be ready for a fight. Because we don't go down easy, we don't give up, we fight for what's ours, and in the end, we always win. Thank you for staying with us through this journey. Please subscribe for more stories and drop a comment. We read every single one.